All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Author Story. I'm Alexander Lim, your host. Our guest for this episode is author Dee Marx, who wrote the novel Beyond Believing. So, Dee, welcome to Author Story. It's beyond great to have you with us.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So, Dee Marx, is that your pen name?
It is my pen name.
Okay.
I chose a pen name because I've worked in the corporate world my whole life and I
Hmm.
wanted to take some liberties with my story, even though it's fiction. I
Okay.
didn't want anybody to be able to identify themselves in the book, so
Okay.
I combined my first name and my friend who passed away, his first name and middle name, to come up with my pen name.
Oh, okay. All right. So, okay, cool. So, how did you become the novelist that you are? I mean, did you like? I mean, like from your past, did you like reading books? Did you like writing when you were a child?
Yeah, so, I've always been a strong communicator, and I went to college and I studied, communications and public relations and marketing, which required a lot of writing. And I just
Right.
noticed that it came pretty natural to me.
Hmm.
So after college, I pursued a program here in Chicago, Second City, which is an improvisational program, which a lot of the folks from Second City get their start from,
Mm-hmm.
and it really opened up my creative juices. And I kind of always had a book inside me, but
Okay.
it had to be the right time. So I didn't pursue it until recently, but it seemed to all come together.
Hmm. All right. Okay. But as a child, did you always want to become a writer? I mean, from what you tell me, you've always had the talent, but did you want to become a writer?
No, it wasn't something I had, you know, as a dream or anything like that as a young child. It was more after college and in my adolescence. And what really sparked this dream was that I lost a dear friend of mine in a car accident when we were
Hmm.
23, and he's who
Okay.
the book is based on.
Right.
And we were such a young age, and it was such a tragedy and very hard to move on from. And
Right.
so, several years into, 20 years into processing all the grief, what I realized is that, I had this fantastic story I wanted to tell about him and share it with the world. And that's what really drove me to wanting to put that down on paper. So it was kind of, I had the skill and I wanted to write a book, but I never knew what it would be about. And then I just kind of combined everything that I was going through and focused it on our friendship. And
Right.
that's what turned into Beyond Believing.
All right. Cool. All right. So, did you have any other literary influences while you're growing up or right now that might have influenced you in the way you wrote this book?
So, I read a lot of different authors, but one in particular that had a huge impact on me is the author of The Alchemist, Pablo Coelho.
Oh yes,
Uh,
yes.
I read that book at a very instrumental time in my life. So right before I started writing this book, and it was about a shepherd's journey, and I could relate to the parallels that were happening in my life, and just really wanting to go after and pursue what it is that I wanted to find.
Right.
And it really spoke to my soul and helped me kind of formulate my plan. And I just decided that, I just need to sit down and start writing. But there's several other authors in my genre that I really like that I follow. There's
Mm-hmm.
a couple in Chicago where I live, and one of them is Emily Giffin. She's a New York Times bestselling author, romance, chick lit author of a series. And she actually went to a rival high school of mine. She's only a year younger than me.
Right.
So she's somebody from my hometown that has made, been a huge success and I love her books. She's had a couple made into movies. And then there's another
Nice.
woman, Jen Lancaster, who is another very funny, humorous writer, and she lives in Chicago, and I've been following her quite a bit too, and I love all her books. So yeah, I mean, I take influences from many different parts of my life, not just literary, but those are some of my favorites.
All right. Cool. I got that, and I reckon it does show up in your book, I suppose.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Okay. So, as a writer, Dee, what is it that inspires you?
So, it's one of those things where, I'm a very kind of observant person. I'm very present in the moment and I take a lot of things in. And I guess you could say I have a pretty decent sense of humor. So what I do is I kind of incorporate daily life into my stories or how I create characters. I've had a lot of funny things happen to me in my life. And so when I started writing the book, I wrote it from a fictional perspective because I wanted to take liberties around some things and also change dates and times of things that happened. So there's a lot of truth in the book based on things that happened in my real life.
Right.
Um, but there's a lot of fiction as well. And so the average reader wouldn't be able to tell, what would be real and what would be fiction. So it's a very fun mix of being able to take things that happen to real people in the world, but turn it into a story and embellish on it, and make it something funny that people want to read and, make it into something different.
Okay, okay, got that. Well, it's definitely different for me. All right, so not to give away too much, but for the benefit of our listeners who may not have read the book yet, but who might, be interested in reading it, what is Beyond Believing all about?
Sure. So it's a series that I'm writing, and this is the first book in the series. So the series is titled the Beyond series.
Okay.
So the first book in the series is Beyond Believing. The next book in the series is Beyond Love, and the third one is called Beyond Forever. And those two are still being written and have not yet been published.
Okay.
But essentially, it's the focus of the book is on these two main characters, who are Olivia and Finn, and they come from very different parts of life. They live, Finn lives in Scotland, she lives in Chicago, and I tell the book in every other chapter in one voice versus the other. So chapter 1 is about Olivia, chapter 2 is about Finn, and I parallel their journeys throughout the book. And essentially what's happening is they've both gone through this tremendous loss of a loved one in their life, and they're both struggling and grieving and trying to find meaning in the world, and they end up being led to one another through these crazy circumstances. So the reader knows that, that they're finding their way to each other, but the characters don't know that until the very end. So it was a really fun story to tell, and it's based on kind of my real life story, which is when my friend passed away. It was so traumatic and tragic, and I needed to find a way to be able to communicate with him on the other side, and not in like a ghostly fashion or anything like that, but through signs and symbols and songs and things that I see, like license plates and things like that. So I incorporated some of my real life signs that I feel that he's still here and still guiding me to my destiny in a direction where I'm supposed to be going. I feel like, he's my guardian angel kind of guiding me through life. And the same is for that character Finn. And so their lives, the first book really talks about a 20-year time frame. So it's from their adolescence until their probably mid-30s when they end up meeting each other.
Right.
And it just talks about how they got to that point and what influences and experiences in their life brought them together.
Okay, I got that. Cool. So that's something interesting right there. Now, would you classify your book as a paranormal romance novel? I mean, there seem to be paranormal and definitely there are romantic aspects to it.
No, it's one of those things where, and I wrote it in a way, and this is another reason why I wrote it fictionally, because, some people may not subscribe to, believing in, the afterlife or things like that. So I wasn't trying to impose any religious beliefs or anything like that. And, I've done a lot of book clubs since I've written the book, and people are like, are you a medium and can you talk to people? And I'm like, no, it's nothing, it's nothing like that. It's more about, if I'm struggling at a point in my life and I'm like, I'm at this crossroads and I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing? Which direction should I take? I need some guidance. And I'll ask for something specific, like a song. One of the songs that I get often is, my friend was a very big John Mellencamp fan.
Okay.
So we used to go to a lot of his concerts, and he sings a song called Small Town. And the song Small Town is really kind of a ballad that describes my friend's life. Like, it was a short life, but he lived in a small town near his parents and friends, and he lived, the best life he could. So it really reminded me of him after he passed away. And several years later, I was going through, some old letters and things, and I found a postcard that my friend who passed away had sent to me. And in the postcard, he said to me, have you heard Johnny Cougar's new song? And I was like, oh my gosh, like I had already picked small town as my sign. And then I found like 3 years later this postcard that was like referencing John Cougar. And I'm like,
Hmm.
what are the chances? You know what I mean? That it's
Right.
a postcard. He only wrote about 6 sentences that he would reference John Mellencamp and a postcard from, way before. So it's things like that that seem, you can write it off as coincidence, but
Right.
they're really not coincidental if you think about it, because 20 years later, I'm still getting the same answers that I need, and there's no way you can say it's a coincidence. At least I can't.
Right. Okay. Well, actually, that's the thing I want to ask you about, because I read the book and the reveals of Dan to Olivia being the main female lead character, they seem to be very subtle. I mean, it's not like Dan's coming out into the spirit realm and and showing himself to her, but it's very subtle, like through the songs, as you mentioned.
Yes, it's things like I don't want to give it away in the book, but he buys her a very special necklace that is a big symbol of their friendship, and that plays a key role in the book at a later point in time.
Right.
So there's things that I tried to give that were subtle,
Hmm.
that seem coincidental or neat to the reader, but it's those subtleties that end up being like the big things that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that really happened.
Right.
So I wasn't trying to, again, like I wasn't trying to portray that he's a ghost and he comes to me every night and we talk, and
Right.
it's
Right.
nothing like that.
Okay.
It's just more of a presence through, physical things in life that we see and hear every day.
Right. Okay. I got that. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the books. I mean, the book's main characters. I mean, I already mentioned like Olivia, and then there's
Hmm.
Dan, and then there's Finn, who Olivia and Finn eventually wind up towards the end of the book. Who were the inspirations for these? I presume Olivia is you, and Dan is like your
Yes,
friend who passed away.
correct.
Okay.
So Finn is actually a completely fictional character.
Okay.
And so when I say, a lot of the book was fiction, his entire story is fictional. I
Mm-hmm.
do take some of the pieces and parts of his stories are things that either happened to people that I know in my life, or stories or things that, I've heard. But who he was completely made up. And he's a chef in the book.
Right.
And I don't know why I chose for him to be a chef, but I think it was one of those things where, I wanted him to have a profession that people could relate to. And then, I came into the idea of having him participate in a, reality show and a cooking show and things like that. So I was really big into watching the Food Network when I wrote the book. And so
Okay.
I was like, it'd
Okay.
be really cool to make him a chef. So that's kind of how it took that whole path. So his whole story was not based on any one particular person. It was really just more made up.
Right. Okay. Cool. I got that. So, some people, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking, sure, it's a work of fiction, so the author, you, can make up just about anything, or maybe just look it up on Google, which makes it real easy. I'm thinking of like the settings and the place they're into. That
Hmm.
train of thought is usually not the case. So I was just wondering, how much research do you actually do for the book? Like the places, like I mean, like Scotland. And I think unless you've been to Scotland, you wouldn't exactly be
Yeah,
able to figure out what Finn environment Finn lives in, for example.
great question. So I've never been to Scotland, and actually, um, I till recently my next door neighbor was from Scotland.
All
She was
right.
this older woman in her 70s who was very vivacious and very demonstrative, and we lived next door to each other. But even though there was many years between us, we got along very well. We'd usually go for coffee, and she had a pretty remarkable life. And I just remember her telling me stories about growing up and how she met her husband and things like that. And it just was somewhere that I'd always kind of dreamed of going. And so I thought it would be fun to create this international element for this character,
Mm-hmm.
that would separate their lives even further. So what are the chances that their lives would ever interconnect?
All right.
So that's kind of where I came up with the whole international piece. And then, not having been there, I did have to do some research, but I would say, only about 10% of the book is things that I had to research to find out,
Mm.
what would be in that neighborhood. Would a restaurant like this exist over there?
Right, right,
What type of food would he um, be be his specialty, and what kind of a restaurant would he work in?
right.
That sort of thing. So um, the rest of it is really based on my personal experiences and things that just kind of came to me, which ironically, speaking of my friend Dan, is a lot of the ideas I get, I feel like they come out of nowhere. I don't know where they're coming from. I feel like
Okay,
he's almost
okay.
feeding me these ideas.
Right.
So it's been an incredible process.
All right, cool. I got that. So, as you mentioned, Beyond Believing is just the first book in your Beyond trilogy. What is this? What's the concept? What's the trilogy all about, in effect? And what would be is, what would be the kind of stories we can expect from the other two books?
Sure. So when I started writing it, it wasn't necessarily going to be a series, but when I realized kind of the story I wanted to tell, it seemed like way too much to put into one book.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do was build up the characters and kind of explain their individual backstories in the first book. So, I don't go very deep into their characters. It really spans more time, so it's about a 20-year time frame. And then in the next two books, it's going to be a continuation of their relationship, but told in the same manner. So I'll tell one chapter Olivia, one chapter Finn,
Right.
but it'll be more real time. So it'll be kind of picking up where the first book left off, and then the next two books will probably only cover about 2 to 3 years total.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll allow me to kind of go deeper into each character and explain more backstories and have them really get to know each other, and then share their journey together now that they've met. So that's kind of what the next two are really based on.
So it's still gonna be centered around these two characters, Olivia and Finn.
Correct.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. That's gonna be an interesting development. See how these characters develop, certainly.
Yes.
All right. Cool. So, Dee, authors who write fiction books, they sometimes go on a journey. I would do so as they do so, and I just like to know if working on this book has done that for you. Was there any kind of journey or some realizations that came about while you were writing this book?
You know, yes, for sure. I mean, I feel like I kind of, I've worked my whole life in the corporate world, and this book came about at a time where, I was 40 years old. I had just been fired from my first job ever, and
Right.
I was kind of like at this midpoint in life going, what am I doing? Why am I here? What is my purpose on this earth? And it
Okay.
really made me dig deep to figure out like what it is that I'm passionate about, what it is that makes me feel fulfilled. And I kind of took that whole combination of the fact that I had been grieving for all these years, and we've kept Dan's memory alive with my friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
We get together every year, and so he's always a very large presence in all of our friends' lives.
Right.
And then I took this other piece of my life where I really love to write and express my humor, and I kind of combined the two. And that's where I found that, that's really where my passion lied is,
Mm.
friendships are a very, very strong part of my life, probably one of the most important. And I take each friendship very seriously. I have friends that span 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I nurture those friendships consistently. So I feel like even though Dan's not here any longer, I still nurture that relationship because he's still giving me, guidance from the other side.
Right.
So, what I've learned is that, I felt like I was in this box, working in this corporate world, and I had to live by certain rules. And when I started writing this book, I really didn't put any limitations on myself, and I just kind of stepped out of fear and just was like, if only two people read this book, it'll still be worth writing. And
Right.
I could have never imagined it would turn into what it has turned into, but it's been extremely fulfilling and such an amazing accomplishment and a dream. And, it's really like elevated my life to a different level because now I feel like I have a greater purpose and I'm leaving a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it just fulfills me at a level that, any job was not doing for me.
Oh, cool. So I take it you're not going to be heading back to the corporate world anytime soon, then.
Well, unfortunately, I still need to pay the bills. So,
All right.
but
Okay. Yeah.
What's interesting is that I look at it very differently now. So things that used to really get on my nerves and bother me, and
Uh-huh.
I just don't let that stuff impact me because it really, in the greater scheme of things, is not important.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you look back in a year, you even going to remember that conversation or that meeting or whatever. So it's actually given me a lot of freedom to um, be less stressed in a corporate environment. But, the dream is obviously to, potentially be a full-time writer someday. So I did take off 6 months. So I had mentioned I got fired from my job and I got a
Right.
new job right away.
Right.
And then about a year and a half into that is when I started this whole journey with the book. So I took a 6 month sabbatical
Mm-hmm.
from the corporate world to finish the book because I had the momentum going and I'm like, I just want to get it done. And then as soon as I turned it in to be edited and everything, that's when I went back to work. So,
Mm.
you know, I don't have a deadline for the next two because I'm still working, but I'm working on the second one right now. And my goal would be to have both of them published at the same time so I can have the whole series completed.
Mm.
So we'll see how
Okay.
that goes. And my goal would be potentially this fall to release both.
This
So
fall. Okay.
2016.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like what, 10 months from now, 9 months from now?
Yep. Yep.
All right. Okay. That's that's
That's
interesting. Okay.
aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. 2 books, 9 months. That's something.
Yeah. I mean, I have it all outlined and I know how the story's going to go. I just need to concentrate and, settle down and write it. So I'd say I'm about a third of the way through the second book,
Hmm.
but it's flowing really well. So we'll see. I
All
hope I
right.
can stay inspired.
All right. That's cool. That's cool. Now, from what I understand, works of fiction, sometimes they mean something to the writers. Did beyond believing mean anything in particular to you?
You mean the title?
The book itself.
So, you know, the way I came up, so I kind of mentioned that I always wanted to write a book, but I never knew what it was going to be about. I thought it'd be
Right.
funny to write a book about dating or something like that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then when I decided that it was going to be about this subject matter of friendship and, losing a friend and going through loss and grieving and trying to find your way back, in the world, I was really struggling to figure out the name of the book and
Okay.
how I was going to like captivate, or the essence of the book in a title where it would make somebody want to pick it up. So
Hmm. Okay.
I
Okay.
started searching for names, and actually the name came to me kind of out of nowhere. And it's kind of a play on words where, beyond believing is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. That's so beyond belief.
Right.
And
Right.
then it
Right.
also is, believing in the beyond, right? Which is the other side and things that aren't on this earthly, in this physical realm, um, but not in like a ghostly fashion. It's just more like, having hope and faith that there's a bigger picture for all of us, and that, if you stay open to it and everyone's lost a loved one at some point in their life. So,
True. True.
and everyone grieves differently, and everyone wants to potentially know that their loved ones are safe or happy. And so, really anybody can be tuned in or listen to signs. They're typically things that are right in front of your face
Right.
that
Right.
you're just not maybe sensing or picking up on. So, the whole concept of beyond believing was just trying to play in a couple different, um, you know, facets of the story. So, you know, things that are happening in the physical world that are shocking, and things that are happening from the beyond that, requires you to believe that that's really meant for you, kind of
Right.
thing.
Okay. I got that. Interesting. So I guess it fits then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So Dee Dee, you've been a writer and a blogger for some time now. Let, let's say, what advice would you give to someone who's, say, interested in becoming a writer?
So, my best advice would be to try and get out of your own way, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
You probably, just like I did, I sat down, I'm like, who am I? How can I write a book? Who's going to want to read it?
Right.
You go
Right.
through all those questions and self-doubt and fear and anxiety. And, usually your biggest enemy is yourself, right? So you talk yourselves out of the 25 reasons why you shouldn't write the book.
Okay.
And my advice would be just to sit down and write it and don't limit yourself. and go back and edit later. So like tell the story you want to tell,
Mm-hmm.
and then go back and edit yourself, and then show it to people that maybe um, you trust and they can give you some feedback, or find an editor and have it edited just to get an idea of, is this story even flow properly?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something that people would want to read?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so many people started and they don't finish it. I could have never imagined that I would finish writing one novel, let alone three.
Right.
And I think, you just have to stay true to yourself and not edit yourself and not limit yourself, and just, you know, the limit is only your imagination. So
Mm.
if you can think of these great things and it flows into a story, you should definitely pursue continuing to write. There's so many bloggers out there now on so many different topics, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's room for everybody, basically.
All right, cool. I got that. So, related to that, what would be your advice to someone who's looking to publish their very first book?
So, when I started this process, the very first thing I did was I went to a local college course that was being held one evening, and the title of it was How to Publish Your Own Book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was being held by a local publishing company, but it was talking about kind of the pitfalls of writing your own book and how to get it published. And, now that the world has changed, kind of like music, anybody can publish a book,
Okay.
and there's multiple ways that you can go about that. So I didn't know really what I was doing, and so but in my corporate life I'm a project manager,
Okay.
so I was like, okay, well, I need several different resources. I need somebody to design a cover, I need somebody to edit the book, I need somebody to format the book, I need somebody to print the book. So I was thinking in terms of what kind of people do I need to surround myself with, but how do I go about finding them? And then I was approached by a publishing company who kind of offered you this all-encompassing package with marketing and everything else. So I think I would recommend that they do their homework,
Okay.
um, to make sure that they're working with the right partner,
Okay.
and have a solid contract in place, get samples, maybe get references from people if you're going to go with a publishing company, to
Right.
make sure that the published authors that they're representing are happy with the relationship and that things are going smoothly, and really dig into that and don't be afraid to ask questions. But I think I went with a hybrid publisher for my first book, but I'm probably going to publish myself for the next two,
Mm-hmm.
just because of things that worked and some things that didn't. Nothing against the company, but I've learned some lessons, and
Right.
I think that I can make up some efficiencies doing things on my own. So,
Cool.
but I met some great people through the process, and there's definitely people I would have never met had I not gone through it. So I certainly don't regret an ounce of it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, do what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
But
right.
definitely do your homework.
All right. Definitely, definitely. Okay. Cool. So, other than the other two books in the trilogy pipeline, are there any other stories or topics that you're presently exploring as subjects for possible future books?
So I get some ideas and I jot them down. I always carry a notebook, or, on my iPhone, I keep a notepad and make notes and things. But one of the fun things I thought would be a good thing to follow up with the Beyond series would be
Mm-hmm.
to write potentially one book or possibly a series called the Dan Diaries, and
Okay.
have it be from his perspective in heaven trying to get through to me, and
Okay.
like create this whole world of like what his life is like up there and him trying to get through to me, and only being limited to having me stumble across a penny on the street or hearing a
Mm.
song on the radio, or
Right.
and trying to negotiate how he can get through to me with God and things like that. So Dan was super vivacious and had an amazing sense of humor. So I think if I wrote from that voice that I remember, it would be a really funny book, I think.
All right. Cool.
So, and I think he wants me to write it. So
Well, yeah. I mean, who?
that's his selfish ask, is like, hey, I want people to remember me. Why don't you write a book about me?
Yeah, why not? I mean, in the future. I mean, anything's possible in the future.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, so in closing, we're running short of time. So in closing, the book is Beyond Believing. The author is D.D. Marx, And you can find her book at her website, ddmarks.com. You can also find it at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. So, Dee, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being an author story. It was very inspiring for me, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners who will now want to know more about your book and your future projects.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.
Cool. And there are lots more inspiring author stories to tell. If you'd like to keep up with us on Books and Authors, just tap or click to or subscribe to Author Story. And as always, I'll be back next time on Author Story with another inspiring author.